Welcome to Nature Sketch Create's King Penguin step-by-step painting instructions video. In this video I'll be showing you how to use the Nature Sketch Create step-by-step painting instructions to paint the King Penguin. First, collect all your materials and make sure they're ready to go. Remember, this is just a sketch. Take your time, relax, and don't worry if you make a mistake. Step 1. Transfer the image to the watercolor paper. Line up the transfer image with the watercolor paper. Tape part of the side to the back of the watercolor paper. Then take your graphite transfer paper, dark side down, light side up, and place it on top of your watercolor paper. Press it down, and then you're ready to transfer. When transferring the image, start with just a couple of lines to check that your lines are actually transferring. So I'm just going to do this one line over here. You want to use about a medium pressure when transferring the lines, and you do it by just tracing over lines like I did. And you can see the line here. I think that looks good. So I'll go over all these lines. I won't worry too much about getting them exact. This is just a sketch. Put some music on, maybe an audiobook or anything else you might want to listen to, podcast. Just relax and transfer all the lines. And if you get interrupted partway through and you can't finish transferring the lines, you can always take a break and come back to this later. You don't have to do it all in one sitting. I'm just going to go through and transfer all these lines now. I like to flip the paper up and down a few times just to check to see if all the lines that I needed to have transferred were transferred over. I always end up missing something. Or I go over a certain part too light without enough pressure, and it doesn't end up getting transferred. I think that's it. Now I'm going to go ahead and transfer the scientific name, the common name. These are optional. King Penguin. Letters can just be outlined in order to transfer them. Draw right over the scientific name, which is under the common name here. And you can also add in these hole punch lines, but I'm going to leave them off. You can add those at any time. It's very easy to reline this paper up for those lines. There we have it. The whole thing is transferred. Now I'm going to remove the transfer paper, the graphite transfer paper, and set that to the side for future use. And I'm going to remove the tape from the back of the watercolor paper and from the transfer image. And I'll save both the tape, maybe just put it to the side for future use, and the transfer image to protect my painting while I'm painting. And I'll need the kneaded eraser and remove any unwanted marks. This little mark here, maybe lighten some of these marks up a little bit. If I see anything else that the graphite transfer paper left behind that I don't want, that will take it right off. And now I can move on to step 2. Step 2, paint in the wettest, lightest layers of the penguin yellow and orange. First, mix the 1/8 Hansa yellow light with a little bit of water. So take 1 drop, add it to my palette, and then add some water by putting some pressure on my water brush. I want it pretty wet, so I'm going to pull a little bit more onto the side and add even more water. I'll test that on my test strip. It's very, very light, so that's great. Go ahead and add that layer onto my penguin. Picking up the paint and dabbing it onto my towel before applying it to the painting. Getting a little bit more paint dabbing on the towel and applying it to the painting. And that's just a very, very, very light wash over that area, a very light layer. Add it just to the penguin breast area as well, a little top of the neck. This should dry really fast, so I'll mix the next color, the penguin orange. And I have 11 drops of the 1/8 Hansa yellow light. Make sure that's well mixed. Sometimes the paint pigment settles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And then 1 drop of the 3H Brilliant Cadmium Red. These P.H. Martin Hydrus Colors liquid watercolors are so vibrant. A little goes a long way. Mix that together with your water brush. Take a little bit to the side because you're going to be wanting it to be the B color, the really wet, less concentrated color. So you're adding lots of water to that. Dabbing it off on your paper towel and then testing it. And it can even be lighter than that, so just pull just a little bit more to the side, add more water, dab it on your towel and test it again. That looks great. I'm going to check to see this is all dry. Looks dry. Pick up a little bit of that color, dab it on my towel, and then just go ahead and apply it kind of from the center and moving out to the edges on all the same areas. Pick up just a little bit more, dab it on my towel. Everywhere we just added A. And now that I'm done with step 2, I will move on to step 3. Step 3, paint in the wet light layer of penguin brown and a second layer of penguin orange. First, mix the penguin brown color. Take the 24H burnt umber. Make sure it's well mixed because sometimes the paint pigment settles. 1 drop. A new part of my palette here to give me some space. Make sure my brush is clean before applying it to the brown, and add some water. Always make sure your brush is clean between colors. And I'm going to want it pretty wet, not quite as concentrated with the paint pigment, so add more water to decrease that concentration of color. And then, so I don't put too much water on my paper, I'm going to dab it off onto my towel first, and then test it on my watercolor paper. I think that looks good. And so I'll take it, pick it up, dab it on my towel again and apply it. So I'm going to apply that to the penguin's face, feet, and eyes, as you see in step 3. Next, I'll take the C color, which is the penguin orange, a little bit more concentrated, and add that to painting, as you see in step 3. And I'll just test that on my test strip to make sure it's right. Dabbing it, after picking up the color, dabbing it off on my towel, and then applying it to the painting. A little bit on the beak, and on the, oops, a little bit of hair on the tip of my paintbrush, and just pull that off. And then on the cheek area, and then into a little bit on the breast, just the top half of this little section here. I'm dabbing the paint off, and then without any paint, just kind of pulling that a little bit to create a little bit of a gradient. So it's a little darker on the top, lighter on the bottom. And now move on to step 4. Make sure you let it dry. Step 4, paint wettest, lightest penguin gray. So I refilled my brush while I was waiting for this to dry. Now I'll take the 11H carbon black, shake it up, put a drop in my palette, I'll add some water to that by putting pressure on my water brush. Maybe you have a regular paintbrush, you can just add some water from your cup using your paintbrush. And I'm going to make it pretty wet. So I'm pulling some to the side and adding a lot of water to it. Dab it off onto my towel and then test it on my strip. That looks good. Pick up a little bit more, dab it off onto my towel and apply it to the penguin's beak, back, belly, legs, and feet. And it's always a good idea to start light when you're working with watercolor. So just go ahead and apply this to all of those areas. You can add a little bit of a gradient by applying the paint and then dabbing your brush off, getting the color off, a little water on your towel, and then taking the brush to the edges of that paint you just applied. Just one way. Let that dry and move on to step 5. Step 5, paint in the drier, darker penguin gray. A great way to check to see if your painting is dry is with a clean finger. Just dab and see if it's dried. Don't wipe your hand across, because if you do that to the image and the paint's wet, it'll start smearing everywhere and it'll ruin your painting. But if you do that, it's not a big deal. So we'll use a drier, darker wash of F to deepen the color, lines, edges, and shadows as needed to create more dimension and shading as seen in step 5. You want to start in the dark areas and move the color, wash it to the lighter areas. And what will happen is when you put your brush down on the painting, you'll put down a darker color, and as you move it away, it'll get a little bit lighter because the pigment, you have less pigment in your brush. So I'll show you how that works. So you go ahead and add the paint. And see, most of that paint has already come off the brush. So you see the gradient of the darker to the lighter. Go ahead and do that in all the areas as seen in step 5. I did not mean to color over the eye, but that's okay. It's still going to be on the lighter side. I also try picking it up by cleaning up my brush and pulling a little bit of a wet brush over it. But I'm still totally okay because it's not going to be quite as dark as the black. So it'll still look great. This is just a sketch. It's okay to make mistakes. And I'm just referring to the image in step 5. I'm just adding this along the edges until it gets this lighter color, or dabbing up my brush and then going over those edges a little bit more to wash the color. And this is dry now again, so I'll do another layer like I did before. Pulling it along the edges, dabbing on my towel a little bit, and then going along where I left off to create a kind of a gradient wash. The wing is still a little damp, so I'm going to leave it and work a little bit on the belly. Again, dabbing the paint off of my brush, and then with the wet damp brush, just kind of pulling that paint over that space. More on the beak, and in these areas on the belly next to the arm, dabbing it on my towel. If I get too much pigment, I just dab it off on my towel. And if I don't need any more pigment, I want to pull a little bit of this, you can pull a little bit of this into the shadow on the belly. Pick up some more paint. Not being super exact, just kind of getting that paint in there. And my image in step 5 is still a lot darker. I'm going to add one more layer, avoiding the eye this time. So the head. And then a little bit more to the back as well. So that's a lot darker in my image in step 5. Again, using that same technique, paint the areas along the edges, dab my brush off, and then weten. Put it down a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing here next to the wing. So I put some paint down, and then I'm just going to, without any paint on my brush, with a little bit of just some clean water, just wash that over a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing with the wing, painting the edge with this dark color, even a little bit lighter but still dark on that edge. Cleaning the paint off my brush, and with a little bit of a damp brush, pulling some of that paint, not too much water, just a little bit, to the center to add a little bit of a gradient. See, maybe a little bit more to the feet. The feet in my image 5 look a little bit darker. And if you don't get all the paint done now, you can add more layers later after you add the ink. Sometimes it's easier to tell if you need more paint at that point. And also it's going to give it a chance to dry a little bit. But now we'll move on to step 6. Step 6, adding the ink lines. You can use the 005 black micron to outline the common name and the scientific name, and just draw in all of the outlines of the penguin. You can really refer to all the transfer image lines to just be basically redrawing those over the penguin. Let's start anywhere and just go ahead and start drawing those lines. We're done adding all the 005 ink lines, and you can always go back if you miss anything, so don't worry too much about getting them all in. You can move on to the 01 black micron to write in the scientific name in a thicker line and thicken some of the lines as seen in step 6B. Once you've added in all of the 01 lines, go ahead and move on to the 08 pen, the 08 black micron. And this is great. You just fill it in all the dark areas, like all the space in the head. I recommend kind of adding them in lines first, and then filling it in, leaving some of the space blank. Areas where the light's hitting it a bit. So just kind of scribble in like that and then fill in around it. Right now that I've added in all the 08 pen marks, and again after step 7 you can add more ink lines if you missed anything or want to go back. But I like where this is at, and so I'm going to move on to step 7. Step 7, add more penguin gray F and drier darker penguin orange C and penguin brown D as needed. This might take a few layers to accomplish. Make sure to let it dry in between each layer. So I'm going to start with the darker color, so F, the penguin gray. I'm going to start with this one because it'll give me some time to let it dry if I start here and have to go back. It's a large space. It may take a little bit of time. So I'm just going to take that, really darken these areas up. I don't think I'm going to wash the color this time, just I like the way it looks right now. Picking up the paint and dabbing on my towel between after picking it up before applying it to my painting. Went a little too quickly and got some paint out of the lines, and as I mentioned before, you can easily just fix that. So I'm just going to extend some of the feather lines here and then extend the foot shading a little bit. And since this is a sketch, it's totally fine. You don't have to worry too much. Like I said, you can always add more ink lines or whatever you need. Since that got pretty dark, I'm going to darken this bottom a little bit more on the foot just to make it all blend in better. And maybe here too. Alright, so I like where this painting's at and how it looks. And it's interesting because every time I paint this, it turns out a little bit different. And you'll find that your painting is going to be very unique to you. Next, you have some options. You can punch holes in this art and add it to your sketchbook, or you can gift it, you can frame it, but also make sure to add it to our Facebook fan art page. I'd love to see it. Don't forget to visit our website at www.naturesketchcrate.com to shop for these lessons in the sketch crates and sign up for our newsletter for updates on future releases of lessons.